Hello everyone, welcome back to my Warrior Dungeon series. So, last week we did Cutter's Cry. Not my favorite dungeon, but it's not really that hard, so it's no big deal. But this week, unfortunately, we've got good old Stone Vigil. I'm sure if you've seen my samurai videos, at least at the beginning, I'm not a fan of Stone Vigil. It's not necessarily that I absolutely hate what the dungeon is about, it's mostly that I just hate what it looks like. Also, this is the first dungeon that actually requires just a little bit of skill in terms of tanking. So, we should probably not wave at the enemies. That's not really going to do us any good here. So, first things first, you want to go ahead and make sure you're in Defiance. And then just keep these guys off your party members. Pretty simple stuff. So this is the level 41 dungeon. This is a MSQ dungeon, so you will have to do this dungeon at some point. I don't think we have any new abilities, but I'm going to check just to make sure. Let me get to this next pull. So I like to pull just a little smaller in this dungeon because of how hard some of these enemies hit. You can pull, I could probably pull a little bit bigger because Cassie is joining me yet again. But, you know, I'd rather be safe than sorry. So I'm going to do just that. I'm going to be safe. Alright, now that I have aggro established. Alright, so we do have access to Home Gang, actually. That's our new ability. Also Unchained. We might have had that ability in the last episode, I honestly don't remember. But we have both of those. So what Unchained does is it essentially negates the 25% damage debuff that you get when using Defiance. Because what Defiance essentially does is it gives you a damage debuff, so you do less damage, but you gain immunity/hate a lot easier. Aggro, you know, whatever you want to call it. You gain that a lot easier, but you sacrifice damage to do so. And also you take less damage. So you do less damage, you take less damage. It's a trade-off. I don't know how you have aggro. Well, there we go. Fixed that problem. I'm stunning you. I don't really feel like dealing with your crap right now. So yeah, this dungeon can get kind of hectic. Basically, if you're sort of new to tanking, I recommend taking this dungeon pretty slow. Just pull really small. Just, you know, just one group. Slow and steady wins the race. If you try and go too quickly and you pull too much, you will get wrecked pretty easily. So, yeah, better safe than sorry. So I can actually pull a little bit bigger on this pull, since these enemies here only number 2 and not 3. This is pretty much the only place in the dungeon I think that I'm gonna pull really big, except for maybe one other spot. But yeah, so I already explained Unchained. Basically, it's just negating the damage debuff that you get by using Defiance. So when you're in your DPS stance, which we don't even get to level 52, so I'm not going to go into it, but when you do use that, you can't even use Unchained. It's replaced by a different ability at that point, I believe. Or you may just not be able to use it at all. But yeah, so that is Unchained. Now the other ability we have is called Home Gang. I totally just messed up my combo there. But what Home Gang does is it essentially binds you in place to where you're standing, and you have to cast this on an enemy. So you have to be targeting an enemy, and you use Home Gang, and it'll bind you in place where you're standing, and also bind the enemy in place where they're standing. At the same time, you cannot be killed. You can still lose health, but you can't be killed. So you can take damage all the way down to 1 HP, and then at that point, you'll stop taking damage. So it's basically your oh shit button, as I like to call it. Like Paladin has Hollow Ground, and Dark Knight has Living Dead, I believe it's called. So every tank has their oh shit button. The button you press when you're about to die and you don't know what to do, and you're just like, save me! That's the button you press. You can't be killed while you're using home gang, but you also cannot move, and the enemy you have tethered cannot move. So you need to keep those things in mind. But yeah. Here, I'll go ahead and use it just to show you. So I'm trying to move, I can't move, the boss also cannot move during this, and also my health cannot go any lower than 1. You can use that every 3 minutes. So it's a pretty useful ability, but it's not quite as powerful as Hallowed Ground. But at the same time, its cooldown is also half that of Hallowed Ground. Hallowed Ground is a level 50 paladin ability that essentially completely negates all damage from practically every single source. Some things can still damage you, but usually it's just knockback type effects. For example, if there's a mechanic in a fight where you can get knocked off a ledge and get killed that way, Hallowed Ground will not protect you from that. However, if it's just static damage hitting you, then you won't take any damage at all while that buff is active. But unfortunately, that really powerful buff comes at a price. You can only use that once every 7 minutes. So you really have to be careful with how you use that ability. Home gang is a little more lenient. You have a 3-minute cooldown instead of a 7-minute cooldown, so it's a little bit easier to use without being like, wow, is it really worth using right here? But yeah, it's no big deal. Home gang is pretty nice. So that was the first boss. Really nothing special at all about that guy. He does have one attack though where he will cleave in a random direction, not necessarily facing you. So as everyone other than the tank, you just need to move out of the way, basically. And you just tank that like any normal boss. Not really a whole lot to that one. So here we have another trash pull. Nothing major here. Just a whole bunch of dragon type enemies. That's pretty much all this dungeon is just dragon type enemies. And almost done with this pull here. And they're gone. And we move up this way. Got a couple more guys here. I'm gonna go ahead and pull a little big. Not that big. Actually, you know what? No, I changed my mind. I'm just gonna pull these 4 guys. And I'm gonna stop here. So if you're a little more of an inexperienced tank, I still definitely recommend you tank this very slowly. Just take your time with it, one group at a time. You can't go wrong with doing one group at a time. Sure, it'll take you longer to finish the dungeon, but at the same time, if you wipe 3 or 4 times trying to pull big, then you actually take longer to finish the dungeon than if you had just done it the slower route in the first place. So you basically have to play to your strengths and your weaknesses. If you don't think you can handle pulling big, then don't pull big. It's as simple as that. And if your party doesn't like you because of that, then they need to get over it. That's not your problem to fix, that's theirs. As the tank, you more or less have control over what your party does and does not do in a dungeon. Because you're the one that takes all the aggro, you're the one that takes all the damage. If they try and tank, they get killed. So they basically have to do what you want. Now, after saying that, I don't want anyone to think, oh, well, since I'm the tank, I get to boss this group around. They can't tell me what to do. I'm the leader in charge. No, that is not how you need to look at it. You just need to look at it as, oh, I'm the leader here. I need to take charge. You don't really have control over anyone. You just need to lead everyone to victory. That's essentially how you need to look at it. As long as you do that, you'll be a really good tank, and people will like you. It's not necessarily important that people like you, but it definitely helps. So this is the last trash pull here before the second boss. The second boss actually does have a mechanic that I'll need to go over. It's nothing too crazy. It's just something you do need to pay attention to though. Usually, at least in my groups, we just have the healer do it. because it's really simple. It only takes like 1 second and it doesn't inconvenience the healer at all. The tank will never do this mechanic. It'll always be a mechanic for either one of the 2 DPS to do or the healer, and usually we just choose the healer to do it because it's really easy, and then the DPS can just focus on DPSing. So here's the second boss, Koshai, something like that. So this is one of the few bosses we want to pull and bring him to the beginning, to the start, the opening of this area. We don't want to tank him at the back of the room, we want to tank him at the front of the room. And the reason for that is if you look back there, towards the back, you'll see 3 cannons. One on the left, one on the right, and one in the middle. And after a certain period of time, a dragon is going to spawn behind one of those cannons, and you want to go up to that appropriate cannon and shoot him down. His name is Isgebind, something like that. So Cassie said she'll take cannons, so basically all you have to do if you have cannons is look for the dragon, walk up to the cannon in front of it, and shoot it. That simple. That's really the only mechanic you have to worry about here. Every once in a while, the boss itself will shoot those little tornadoes. He just sort of randomly targets the player and shoots them out. Sometimes those tornadoes can really get in the way. So, you know, it can be irritating, but for the most part, it's not that big of a deal. Also, he really won't have enough time to shoot out all that many of them before he dies. Because as you can see, he's at 30% and he's only shot out 2 of them. So we should be okay. Just do your best to avoid them. So at this point, by the time you get to Stone Vigil, you should have tanking basics pretty much down to a T. I know I haven't really been covering the basics of tanking all that much since the first few dungeon videos I did, which is like, I figure by this point you probably already know how to tank, and you're just sort of wanting to figure out how to do the dungeon itself instead of learning how to play your class specifically. Of course, as we get to the higher level dungeons and we get new abilities, I'm definitely going to cover all of that. So, I'm going to pull just a little big here. It's nothing too crazy. It's just 8 enemies. Or 6 enemies, rather. I can't even count. I'm going to use a few extra overpowers here. Just want to make sure I have aggro. Because when you pull big, especially in these beginning leveling dungeons, and specifically this dungeon, because it can get really crazy sometimes, if you lose aggro, your party will die very quickly. So it's very important that you keep aggro at all times. And that is what your goal is, just always have aggro. If you don't have aggro as the tank, 99% of the time, that's a problem. 99% of the time, you're going to want aggro. Now there are very specific situations where you will not want aggro. And of course, if we ever encounter any of those situations, I will be very sure to specify what you're supposed to do in those situations. But rule of thumb is you always want to be getting hit. As the tank, you want the damage. Nobody else needs to be taking damage. Oh, well, Cassie pulled the dragon. So, add the dragon to the fight here. No big deal. There we go. Pull these guys here. And this is the last pull before the final boss. So this dungeon is a relatively short dungeon. If you pull it off successfully, if you've got an experienced tank and an experienced healer, this dungeon really isn't all that bad. But if you have a noob tank or a noob healer, or if both of them are noobs, it can get a little hectic sometimes. But, you know, everyone's experience will be different. Some people can get through this dungeon in like 15 minutes, or some people could get through the dungeon in half an hour, some even longer than that. You know, it just depends. Depends on your composition, it depends on the experience level of the players. There's a bunch of different things that go into it. Looks like we're missing one person. Oh, no we're not. It's just the auto turret. Alright. So here we are, final boss. Isgabine. So this is the dragon that was dropping by on occasion during the second boss. He's back for real this time, and we're actually going to kill him. This boss generally is not that difficult, but I've seen a couple wipes here over my experience with the game. There's really only one major thing you need to dodge, and that's his range breath attacks. Couldn't really get that out, and that's what this is right here. On the ground, he'll put out a little rectangle going across the arena, and he's going to rush just like that, and anyone standing in that's going to take pretty heavy damage. And they're going to get a frost debuff. They're going to take constant damage over time. So that's definitely something you don't want to get hit with if you can help it. Rhyme Wreath is just a room-wide AoE. Everyone's getting hit by that, there's no way to dodge it. So here before too long, he's going to start doing the second phase of the fight, which is not really that complicated. It's more or less the same as the first phase, but with a couple added AoEs at the beginning. Plus he'll do his little zone AoE twice, instead of just the one time a moment ago. It's really not all that bad. If you stand near the center of the room, you should be fine. So he's going to fly up a second time, and he's going to target every player with a circle AoE. Generally what I do is just stand in a corner, and I just sort of walk them around like this. I believe there are 3. Oh, looks like just 2. So then he's going to do another zone AoE, and he's going to do a second one. There he goes. And that's that. So now he's going to drop down on the tank. He always drops down on the tank. I'm going to drop him right here. And then turn him around. It's a little cramped, I apologize. I'll see if I can back out here. Hopefully that's good enough. A little close to the wall. Like I said, I apologize. Not the greatest view. And I believe from here we just DPS until he dies. So yeah, not the most complicated boss out there. But I have wiped here a couple times. It really just depends on the experience level of the group. And there he goes. He is down. Ancient sword. Oh, that was weird. Anyway, I don't want it. So yeah, that was Stone Vigil. Not my favorite dungeon. In fact, I don't really like it that much at all, but it's not the hardest dungeon once you've gone through it a few times, but if it's your first time, it could give you some trouble. It really just depends on how many veterans you've got in your party. But you know, just like every piece of content in the game, the more you practice it, the better you'll get at it. So just practice and repetition. That's basically all you gotta do. I'm approaching 2,000 completions and instance content in this game, so I've done my fair share of dungeons. I've done every dungeon in the game quite a few times. So, you know, it just comes with the time investment, basically. You'll get better at it if you struggle. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next week for the Zamel Darkhold, which is actually one of my favorite A Realm Reborn dungeons. Leveling dungeons anyway. It can be a really bad struggle if you get a bad group, which does happen unfortunately at times, but if you get a good group, this is a really fast dungeon, a really fun dungeon, and it drops a really nice gear set. I might even go over what that gear set is in said video, but that is a video for next week. So, I'm going to wrap this video up. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.